My hand was still in the air, holding out a blue gift bag, when he stepped back like I had contaminated him. We were standing in the middle of a crowded restaurant for his 50th birthday party. The room was filled with the smell of expensive steak and the sound of clinking wine glasses. My father, Marcus, looked at the gift and then looked at me with a cold, sharp disgust. He didn't take the bag. Instead, he raised his voice just enough so that the surrounding tables would hear him. It was a calculated move to humiliate me. "Don't start this again," Marcus said, his voice booming through the sudden silence of the room. "I've told you 1,000 times, and I'll say it in front of everyone here. She's not mine." The words hit my chest like a physical weight, making it hard to draw a single breath. People began to stare, and I heard a woman at a nearby table laugh nervously. My father's wife, Vanessa, stood beside him, smoothing her silk dress and smiling like she had just won a grand prize. I stood there, frozen, feeling the heat crawl up my neck. This wasn't the first time Marcus had denied me. It was just the loudest and worst. "My name is Allison Parker, and I have been fighting just to exist for my entire life. I wasn't looking for his money, and I didn't want his fancy house or his high-standing reputation in our town. All I ever wanted was the simple truth. For 18 years I lived as the rumor that Marcus tried to bury. He was a successful developer who built half the shopping centers in the county. He had a perfect life with his wife and their 2 real kids. They had holiday photos in matching sweaters and Sunday dinners at the country club. Meanwhile, my mother and I lived in a small apartment on the other side of the tracks. We scraped by, quietly carrying the truth that everyone else seemed too uncomfortable to mention. Every time I tried to reach out to him, Marcus shut me down. Each rejection was colder and more embarrassing than the last. He didn't just ignore me. He tried to erase me from history. He acted like I was something shameful that needed to be hidden to protect his image. But the first time he rejected me, I wasn't an adult at a party. I was only 6 years old. I remember clutching my mom's hand so tightly it hurt as we stood on the porch of a large brick house. It was a hot July afternoon, and I was wearing my favorite yellow sundress. My mom had finally gathered the courage to confront him. When the door opened, Marcus stood there in a crisp white shirt. He looked down at me, and for a second I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. But then his face turned into a mask of stone. He looked straight at my mother and said, "You have the wrong house." Before my mother could say a word, he shut the door. The sound of the deadbolt clicking into place was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I looked up at my mom, and her face was pale and trembling. She didn't cry until we got back into our old beating-up car. That was the moment my life split in two. I realized there was the world Marcus lived in, and then there was the world he left me in. I grew up knowing that I was a secret he was ashamed of, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. As I grew older, the differences between our worlds became even more obvious. Marcus's real children, a boy and a girl, had everything a child could ever dream of. I saw them in the local newspaper, winning horse riding competitions and traveling to Europe for summer vacations. They had a father who showed up to their school plays and cheered for them at soccer games. I, on the other side of town, had nothing but silence. I had a lot of questions that my mother never fully answered, no matter how much I asked her. She would just tell me that some men were too afraid of the truth to live in it. But I could see the sadness in her eyes every time Marcus's name was mentioned. I spent a lot of my childhood wondering what was wrong with me. Was I not smart enough? Was I not pretty enough? Why did those other kids get a father while I only got a cold shoulder? I watched him from a distance for years, seeing a man who was respected by the whole community, while I was the only one who knew his dark secret. Everything changed the summer I turned 15. My mother was at work, and I was cleaning out the back of her closet to make room for some new winter coats. In the very corner, tucked behind a stack of old blankets, I found a small wooden box. It was locked, but the hinge was loose. I pried it open and my heart stopped. Inside were dozens of old letters and photos. They weren't just random papers. They were letters from Marcus to my mother, dated months before I was born. His handwriting was unmistakable. The letters were full of promises and apologies. In one, he wrote about how much he loved her and how they would find a way to be together. There were photos of them laughing at a lake, looking like a perfectly happy couple. The dates on the letters matched the timeline of my existence perfectly. He knew. He had always known exactly who I was. As I sat on the floor with those papers scattered around me, the anger began to burn. He wasn't just mistaken, he was a liar. Why was he pretending I didn't exist? Armed with the proof from the box, I made my first real attempt to talk to him when I was 16. I didn't want a scene. I wrote him a simple, careful letter. I told him I didn't want his money or a place in his will. I told him I just wanted to know him. I left the letter at his office, tucked inside an envelope with one of the old photos I had found. I waited for weeks, jumping every time the phone rang or a car pulled into our driveway. I hoped he would finally be honest. Instead of a phone call, I got a visit from a man in a dark suit. He claimed to be Marcus's lawyer. He sat in our small kitchen and pushed a thick manila envelope across the table. Inside was a legal cease and desist order. The lawyer told my mother and me that if I ever tried to contact Marcus or his family again, they would sue us for harassment. He called my letter an attempt at emotional extortion. I realized then that Marcus wasn't just ignoring me. He was willing to use his power to crush me. I spent my final 2 years of high school in a state of quiet fury. I worked 3 jobs, one at a grocery store, one as a tutor, and one cleaning offices at night. I saved every penny I earned. I didn't spend it on clothes or movies like the other kids. I had a goal that kept me going through the long nights and the exhaustion. If Marcus wanted to use the law and his reputation as a shield, I would have to find a way to pierce it. I was going to get a DNA test. The problem was that I needed his DNA, and he would never give it to me willingly. I watched his house for weeks, learning his routine. I knew he went to the same coffee shop every morning at 7:30 a.m. I knew he always sat at the same corner table and read the newspaper. I knew he was a man of habit, and I planned to use those habits against him. I wasn't a criminal, but I was a daughter who had been pushed too far. I just needed one thing he had touched. One rainy Tuesday, I followed him into the coffee shop. I wore a heavy hoodie and kept my head down. I watched as he finished his latte and left the paper cup on the table before walking out to his luxury car. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, I moved. I grabbed the cup from the busing station before the teenager working there could toss it. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might faint. I tucked the cup into a plastic bag and hurried out into the rain, clutching it to my chest. I had already researched the best private labs in the country. I sent the sample away that very afternoon, using a large chunk of the money I had saved from my jobs. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day felt like a year. I went to school and worked my shifts, but my mind was always at that lab. I wondered if the sample would be enough. I wondered if Marcus would find out. But most of all, I wondered if the truth would actually change anything, or if he was too powerful to be stopped. The results arrived in a plain white envelope on a Friday afternoon. My mother was still at work, so I sat at the kitchen table alone. My hands were shaking so much I almost ripped the paper inside. I pulled out the report and scanned the lines of technical data until I found the final conclusion at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. There it was. The absolute scientific proof. I wasn't a rumor, and I wasn't a mistake. I was his daughter, and I had the documents to prove it. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange, cold sense of calm. The weight of 18 years of doubt and shame suddenly lifted off my shoulders. I realized that the shame never belonged to me. It belonged to the man who lived in the brick house. I took the report and put it in a safe place. I knew I couldn't just mail it to him. He would just have his lawyer burn it. I needed to wait for the right moment. A moment where he couldn't hide, and where his reputation would be on the line. That moment came when Marcus announced he was running for a seat on the city council. His campaign was built on the idea of family values and integrity. His face was on billboards all over town, showing him smiling with his wife and his 2 real children. He was holding himself up as the moral pillar of our community. He talked about honesty and the importance of a father's role in the home. Every time I saw his face on a poster, my blood boiled. He was using a lie to gain power, and I wasn't going to let him. I decided to show up at his campaign kickoff event. It was a formal dinner at the town's largest hotel. I spent the last of my savings on a nice dress and a ticket to the event. I didn't tell my mother what I was doing. I didn't want her to be afraid. I walked into that ballroom with the DNA report tucked into my small clutch bag. I saw Marcus on the stage, basking in the applause of the town's elite. He looked so confident, so untouchable. He had no idea that the wrong house girl was in the room. I waited until the question and answer portion of the evening. Marcus was standing at the podium, smiling and answering soft questions about property taxes and park funding. I stood up and waited for the microphone to reach me. When I finally held it, the room went quiet. I could see Marcus squinting into the crowd, trying to recognize me. As I stepped into the light, his smile faltered. He recognized me now. I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the edges of the podium. He knew exactly who was standing there. "Mr. Marcus," I said, my voice steady and clear through the speakers. "You talk a lot about family values and the importance of being a present father. I have a question about consistency. How does a man of integrity explain denying his own flesh and blood for 18 years? I have the proof right here." I held up a sealed envelope, not yet showing the contents. A collective gasp went through the room. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Marcus stared at me, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red, but he stayed silent. For a few seconds nobody moved. Then Marcus's wife, Vanessa, stood up from the front row. She looked at me with pure venom. "This is a lie," she screamed. "Security, remove this girl. She's been harassing our family for years." The security guards started moving toward me, but I didn't run. I stepped back, tucking the envelope back into my bag. I had made my presence known, but I wasn't ready to release the hammer just yet. As the guards grabbed my arms, I looked Marcus right in the eye and whispered, "Your clock is ticking." He didn't say a word. He just stood there, paralyzed by the sudden collapse of his carefully built image. The event ended in total chaos. People were whispering and taking photos with their phones. I was escorted out of the building, but I didn't feel like a loser. I felt like I had finally spoken after being silent for a lifetime. I walked home in the cool night air, knowing that the town was now buzzing with curiosity. The family values candidate was about to face a very long and public week of questions. The next morning the rumors were everywhere. People who had looked the other way for years were suddenly eager to talk. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. My mother sat at our kitchen table, her hands trembling as she checked her social media feeds. "They're talking about it, Allison," she whispered. "Everyone is asking who that girl at the gala was." We stayed inside as the tension in town grew. I still didn't give any interviews. I wanted the suspense to build. I wanted Marcus to wonder when I would strike again. By the middle of the week, Marcus's campaign tried to spin the story. They issued a statement saying I was a troubled young woman seeking a handout. This only made me more determined. I watched from my window as his campaign trucks drove by, still sporting his smiling face. He thought he could outrun the truth by painting me as a villain. But he didn't realize that I was holding the only piece of paper that mattered. Every time he attacked my character, he was just making the final reveal more devastating. I started receiving messages from strangers. Some were supportive, but many were from Marcus's associates, offering me money to go away quietly. I saved every one of those messages. They were more proof of his desperation. I realized that Marcus wasn't just a liar. He was a man who believed everything had a price. He thought he could buy my silence just like he had bought his reputation. Little did he know, my 18 years of exclusion couldn't be repaid with a check. I was waiting for the ultimate stage. Marcus's big televised debate was scheduled for the following Monday. It was going to be the most watched event in the county's history. He was planning to use the platform to clear his name and secure his lead in the polls. I knew this was the moment. I spent the weekend preparing, making sure every document was in order. I wasn't just going to show the test results. I was going to show the letters, the legal threats, and the attempted bribes. I was going to show the town the man behind the mask. Monday evening arrived with a heavy storm. The debate hall was packed with journalists, local leaders, and citizens. I arrived early, wearing the same yellow sundress I had worn when I was 6, now fitted for a woman, but the message was the same. I sat in the back row, blending into the shadows. Marcus walked onto the stage looking remarkably composed. He started his opening statement by talking about his dedication to truth and transparency. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. He was walking right into the trap. Halfway through the debate, the moderator brought up the incident at the gala. Marcus took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. "That young lady is someone I feel deeply sorry for," he said with practiced pity. "She is clearly being manipulated by people who want to see this town fail. I have no relation to her, and I will not let these baseless claims distract us from the work ahead." The crowd applauded, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually win the room over. That was when I stood up again. This time I didn't wait for a microphone. I walked toward the stage, and the cameras turned to follow me. The security guards moved to block me, but the lead journalist from the local paper stood up and shouted, "Let her speak. We want to see the proof." The room erupted in shouts. The moderator, sensing a historic moment, signaled the guards to step aside. I reached the edge of the stage and looked up at Marcus. He looked like he wanted to vanish through the floorboards. I didn't say a word at first. I simply took the DNA report and the stack of letters from my bag. I walked to the moderator's table and laid them out under the document camera, which projected them onto the massive screens behind Marcus. The 99.99% paternity result filled the room in giant glowing numbers. Next to it, I placed the letter where Marcus had written to my mother about our beautiful secret. The audience went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive hall. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He looked at the screen, then at the audience, and finally at me. The family values candidate was standing in front of the entire county, caught in a lie that was now impossible to deny. The moderator picked up the report and read the lab's name aloud. "This is an accredited forensic lab," he noted, his voice sounding stunned. "Mr. Marcus, do you have a response to this?" Marcus opened his mouth and closed it again. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The audience didn't wait for him to find his voice. The room exploded into a chorus of boos and shouts of "liar" and "shame." I stood there at the base of the stage, feeling the power shift in real time. This wasn't just a political defeat. It was a moral reckoning. I saw Marcus's wife, Vanessa, get up from her seat and walk out of the hall without looking back. She knew the game was over. The man who had spent his life erasing me was now being erased by his own actions. The debate was cut short as the crowd surged forward. I was escorted out by the journalists, who were now eager to hear my story. That night I gave my first full interview. I told them everything: the threats from the lawyers, the coffee cup DNA theft, and the wooden box. I wasn't doing it for fame. I was doing it so that no one could ever doubt the truth again. I wanted the town to see the full extent of the lengths Marcus had gone to protect his precious, fake image. The fallout was immediate and total. By Tuesday morning, Marcus had dropped out of the race. By Wednesday, his construction firm announced it was being investigated for the financial irregularities I had mentioned during my interview regarding the consultancy fees used to hide my existence. His world was falling apart piece by piece. He had spent 18 years trying to bury me, and now he was the one being buried under the weight of his own secrets. I finally felt like I could take a full, deep breath. Over the next few weeks, the town's attitude toward my mother and me changed completely. People who had ignored us for years were now stopping us on the street to apologize. We received flowers, letters of support, and even offers of jobs. But we didn't want their pity. We just wanted the peace that comes with the truth. My mother finally felt comfortable walking into the local grocery store without looking at the floor. She was no longer the other woman. She was a mother who had raised a strong daughter. I watched from a distance as Marcus's luxury cars were towed away and for sale signs went up on his properties. He had lost his family, his career, and his standing in the community. He was a broken man, living in the shadow of the giant liar headlines that followed him everywhere. I realized that the greatest punishment for a man like Marcus wasn't jail or poverty. It was being forced to live as the person everyone now knew him to be. He could no longer hide behind his suits or his billboards. I decided to use the momentum to start a foundation for children in similar situations. I wanted to make sure that truth wasn't something only the wealthy could afford. We provided free legal counsel and DNA testing for families who were being denied. I found a sense of purpose I had never known. My struggle had given me the tools to help others. I was no longer defined by the father who rejected me, but by the work I was doing to help others who had been rejected. My siblings, the real kids, reached out to me eventually. They were devastated by what they had learned about their father, but they didn't blame me. They wanted to know their sister. We started meeting for coffee, and I saw the same pain in their eyes that I had carried for years. They had been lied to just as much as I had. We formed a bond that Marcus could never have imagined. We were a family united by the truth, and for the first time we were all free. The town eventually moved on to other news, but the story of the DNA gala became a local legend. It was a reminder that no one is above the truth. I finished my degree and became a licensed social worker, focusing on family advocacy. I married a man who loved me for exactly who I was, and we built a life based on honesty. I made sure my children knew their history, both the good and the bad. I wanted them to understand that integrity is the only thing that lasts. Marcus moved away to a small town in another state, living a quiet, lonely life. He never tried to contact me again, and I never tried to find him. We had said everything that needed to be said on that stage. The silence between us was no longer a weapon he used against me. It was a boundary I had set for myself. I didn't need his apology to move on. I had found my own closure the moment the town saw those giant numbers on the screen. My mother lived a long and happy life, finally free from the shame that had been forced upon her. She spent her final years working at the foundation and playing with her grandchildren. When she passed away, she did so with a smile on her face, knowing that her daughter had changed the world. I held her hand and thanked her for the wooden box in the closet. Without her quiet preservation of the truth, I never would have found the strength to fight for it. Now, I am sitting on my own porch, looking out at the town that once tried to erase me. I am Allison Parker, and I am a name that people respect. I learned that you can't choose your father, but you can choose your future. I chose a life of truth, and it gave me everything I ever wanted. The story that started with a shut door ended with an open heart. And as the sun sets over the hills, I know that the truth is finally home. The real revenge began about a year after the debate. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth did the work for me. Marcus's former business partners began a massive audit of his firm's books. They discovered that he had been using company funds to pay off the lawyers who had threatened my mother and me for years. It wasn't just a moral failing. It was corporate embezzlement. Because the lawyers' fees were tied to hiding a liability, the board of directors sued Marcus for every penny he had left. He was forced into a humiliating public bankruptcy. He had to stand in court and admit, under oath, that he had spent over $100,000 of other people's money just to keep his own daughter a secret. The judge was scathing, calling his actions a masterclass in cowardice and fraud. Marcus lost his last remaining assets. His retirement accounts, his vacation homes, and even his personal car. He went from a millionaire developer to a man living in a rented room in a boarding house. But the financial ruin was only the beginning of the end for his reputation. A group of local activists, inspired by my story, petitioned the city to rename the shopping center Marcus had built. They wanted to name it after my mother, who had spent decades serving the community as a nurse while being slandered by Marcus's circle. The vote was unanimous. On the day they took down the Marcus Development sign and replaced it with the Parker Center, the whole town showed up to cheer. I watched as Marcus stood on the outskirts of the crowd, wearing a worn-out coat and looking like a ghost. No one spoke to him. No one even acknowledged his presence. He had become invisible in the very town he once thought he owned. He had to watch as the name he tried to hide was elevated, and the name he tried to protect was literally scrapped and hauled away to the junkyard. It was a total reversal of fortune, and it was entirely earned by his own hands. The final blow came when his own son, my half-brother, decided to legally change his last name to Parker. He said he wanted to carry a name that stood for something real. When Marcus heard the news, it was said that he finally stopped fighting. He disappeared from public view entirely, becoming a cautionary tale parents told their children about the cost of a lie. He had spent 18 years denying me, only to end up with no one willing to claim him. I am Allison Parker, and I am the winner. Not because I have more money, but because I have a soul that is clean. I look at my daughter and I know that she will never have to wonder if she belongs. She is a Parker, and in this town that means she is a daughter of the truth. I sit in my office at the foundation, surrounded by the photos of the children we've helped, and I smile. My father denied me for years, but in the end, the truth gave me a life he could never touch. My life is full. I have a career I love, a family that supports me, and a truth that anchors me. I reclaimed my existence from a man who tried to deny it. Marcus thought he could control the narrative, but he forgot that the truth has a way of speaking for itself. I am the living proof of his lies, and the living proof of my own triumph. The wrong house girl finally has the right life, and it is more mind-blowing than I ever imagined. I raise my glass to the memory of the girl in the yellow sundress. You were right to hold on. You were right to search. You were right to speak. The world might have tried to erase you, but you wrote yourself back into the story in bold letters. You are Allison Parker, and you changed everything. The sun sets over the town, and for the first time in 18 years, there are no more secrets. There is only the light of the truth, shining on everything it touches. And it is beautiful. I am home.